This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
You're listening to Green Trails, an environment podcast series where we hit the ground outdoors. I'm your host, Shabana Begum. In this series, we will take you to spaces that are critical to climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss, three interlinked crises that our planet faces. For this episode, we are in East Coast Park, one of the popular beaches in Singapore. But with sea level rise from global warming, this beach landscape could change. To prevent the sea from engulfing the east, the government in 2023 announced plans for Long Island. Under this mega project, 3 tracts of land, about double the size of Marina Bay, would be reclaimed off the east coast, from the Marina East area to the Tanah Merah ferry terminal. The heart of Long Island is to defend the coast from sea level rise. But the ambitious project is also expected to provide space for houses, recreation, and a new reservoir. How would Long Island change the East Coast landscape? What are the implications for nature and marine life nearby? What do young people, who will live to see the project taking shape, have to say? In this episode, we hear from the authorities, a marine expert, and youths. I'm here at East Coast Park, where I'll meet my first 2 guests from the Urban Redevelopment Authority and PUB, the National Water Agency. Lee Wai Kin has had Long Island on his mind for more than 30 years. When Long Island was first mooted in the 1991 URA concept plan, he was a junior college student who participated in a competition related to the project. And now he is Group Director of Strategic Planning at URA, which is spearheading the mega Long Island project. Thank you for coming on the show, Wai Kin.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Tu Jung Chi from PUB, which started helming the country's coastal protection efforts since 2020. Jung Chi is PUB's Senior Deputy Director for Coastal Engineering. Thank you for coming on the show, Jung Chi.
Thank you for having me as well.
So my first question is, I want to paint a scenario of an unprotected East Coast or an unprotected Singapore from sea level rise in 2100. What are some of the risks that we could expect, Jung Chi?
So today, the low-lying coastal areas in East Coast are already susceptible to flash floods during very high tides or when heavy rain coincides with high tides. Now, a major effect of climate change is sea level rise. According to projections from the recently released 3rd National Climate Change Study, mean sea level around Singapore is expected to rise by up to 1.15 meters by year 2100. This means that East Coast beach areas will be submerged more often, reducing the time that families can play at these areas. High tides then could also reach parts of the running tracks. Now, when extreme events such as storm surges and exceptionally high tide hit the coast, sea levels could rise up to 5 meters. This is high enough to potentially flood 1/3 of Singapore. At East Coast, low-lying coastal areas could be at risk of inundation as seawater enters from the coastline and drains. This could flood the entire East Coast Park, the East Coast Parkway Expressway, and areas beyond.
Yeah, sounds very scary and frightening, and that's why we need coastal protection to start at this point. So could you explain what is Long Island and how does it protect against rising seas?
To protect East Coast from high sea waters coming from the coastline, we need a barrier to keep high sea waters out. Long Island comprises land to be reclaimed off East Coast in the form of islands at a distance away from the coastline. Now, with Long Island being reclaimed at a level that is higher than the sea waters, together with barrages adjoining these islands, the Long Island becomes a robust barrier to keep sea waters out and protect East Coast areas.
Yeah, so I think beyond coastal protection, which protects things that are of value to Singaporeans, right? Our homes, our businesses, our infrastructure like the expressway. Long Island also provides an opportunity for us to reshape the East Coast to create exciting and livable precincts for future generations of Singaporeans. So many of us today enjoy walking, cycling, rollerblading along East Coast Park, barbecuing, So with Long Island, we have the opportunity to create another 20 kilometers of new coastal and reservoir parks, which could be added on the reclaimed land to create more parks, waterfront spaces, and water bodies for Singaporeans to enjoy. This is, of course, on top of the existing East Coast Park. So altogether, it actually triples the length of the waterfront area with the reclamation. Additionally, the new land created can also offer new opportunities for us to develop inclusive waterfront living concept.
So I'm guessing houses, recreational spaces would be some of the things that could possibly be explored for the land users on Long Island.
That's right.
What has been happening since the announcement of Long Island last year? What are the first few stages for this?
Okay, so Long Island is going to be a massive and complex project. It could involve reclaiming something like about 800 hectares of land altogether. That's twice the size of Marina Bay, and about the size of 500 football fields altogether. So given the scale of Long Island, we can expect that it will take a few decades to complete. Agencies are starting with technical studies this year. This is expected to take about 5 years to complete. So the technical studies will include engineering studies, environmental impact assessment, and soil investigation works. So this basically allows us to get a better understanding of the soil conditions, the water quality and sea conditions, as well as marine ecology in the area. So in these studies, we also will consider the impact to marine transport, anchorages, as well as recreational users. So through these studies, the agencies hope to explore marine engineering and nature-based solutions to come up with innovative, cost-effective and robust design to better integrate coastal protection measures with land reclamation. So just to give some examples of what we mean by a nature-based solution that we would hope to explore, includes hybrid design for the new coastline, where we can integrate nature elements with engineering solutions for coastal protection, providing ecological and human benefits. So the solutions that will be adopted eventually will depends on the findings of the technical studies that are going on eventually. Yeah.
So after 5 years, we'll have a better idea of how Long Island will shape up to be. Okay. And have you also engaged with the community since the announcement last year? What has been the on-ground feedback?
Right. So I think after the announcement in November last year, we have already received more than 500 written feedback so far. Then from the start of this year onwards, URA together with our partner agencies have also been conducting in-person engagements widely, involving stakeholders from all walks of life and across a diverse age group. They include residents living around the area, businesses in the East Coast area, park users, the general public, nature lovers, sports and recreational interest groups, basically anyone who is interested in the issue. So at these engagement sessions, stakeholders have shared a diverse range of feedback and ideas, including the need for public spaces at the future Long Island and the need for Long Island to be an inclusive space for people of all ages and abilities. So some have expressed enthusiasm for waterfront living, while others have suggested making Long Island a world-class destination for international sporting events. Some have also asked to preserve the existing character of East Coast Park and even enhance that character. Some other stakeholders have also hoped that their communities will continue to have access to the public spaces for activities such as sailing and beach recreation. And others have highlighted the importance of incorporating nature-based solutions and restoring biodiversity at the Long Island.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Wai Kin. And now, Jung-Chi, back to you. So, instead of Long Island, could there have been other solutions?
Besides Long Island, agencies have also studied building a seawall up to a height of 3 meters along the entire waterfront of East Coast Park. Now, this is not ideal, as the seawall will result in periods of disruption to park users during its construction. And even after it's completed, the seawall will permanently limit park users' access to the waterfront for recreation and sports. In addition, this seawall will need to be supplemented by tidal gates and pumping stations, one at each of the 12 drains along this stretch of the coastline. Now, these pumping stations will take up large amount of park space, which is currently occupied by existing greenery and recreational facilities.
And my next question for you, Zhengqi, is could you tell us more about how PUB has been studying the sea level risk at different coastlines around the island?
So coastal protection against the critical threat of sea level rise is a complex endeavor that requires early and prudent long-term planning. And we do so by progressively embarking on site-specific studies for our varied coastlines to understand the characteristics of different segments and to develop the coastal protection measures accordingly. Now, these solutions will include engineering solutions such as seawalls, revetments with nature-based enhancement, and to dovetail with future developments like Long Island at its coast. Now, since commencing the first site-specific study in year 2021 for the City East Coast area, agencies have also commenced studies for Jurong Island and the Northwest Coast. A feasibility study for coastal barriers at the Southwest Coast has also commenced. Now, these studies are expected to take a few years and covers half of mainland Singapore coastline.
I guess among many of the reactions about Long Island, there have been some concerns about the loss to marine life. What do you have to say about that?
So I think for those of us who are old enough, we will remember that East Coast Park, Marine Parade, Bedok South, all these areas used to be part of the sea, right? Our forefathers actually started planning and reclaiming the land for East Coast as early as 1966, and over the course of 20 years, gradually created this additional space for Singapore. The marine habitats that we see today at East Coast Park actually recolonized the space after the reclamation, such as those corals that we see at parts of the seawall, as well as the seagrass meadows at parts of the beach. So as we plan for Long Island, agencies will study how we can facilitate the same recolonization to happen. So for example, we will explore how we can design the seawalls on the outer coastline to recruit corals or protect a perched beach where seagrass can grow again.
And Zhengqi, back to you. Currently, do we have any coastal protection measures? And if so, what are they?
So I would say that for the current coastlines, the measures or the infrastructure that you see today are more catered to guard against erosion. These are not measures for the higher sea levels that we are now designing for. This is why this makes coastal protection effort all the more important work that we need to defend our island against.
Yeah, Green Trails is a podcast that is directed and targeted for the youths, and it is the young people who will possibly grow up to live through the Long Island era. What is your message for them?
Protecting Singapore against sea level rise is a new challenge, and that requires a strong pipeline of talent to carry out the work. Now, this is where you, as youth and students, have a variety of options to join the coastal protection ecosystem. Now, take for example, if your interest is in research and development, then you can undertake research projects and pursue PhD studies under the Coastal Protection and Flood Resilience Institute of Singapore. Now, recently, NUS introduced graduate certificates in coastal protection and flood management, while NTU offers specialization in coastal protection for their undergraduate programs.
As for you, Waikin, what's your message to the young people?
We have received very strong public interest in contributing to the entire discussion on Long Island, and we'll be organizing a few more engagement sessions for the rest of the year as part of the ongoing Draft Master Plan review. So I would encourage youth who are interested to partake in this process to actually sign up for these engagement sessions, or if they like, they could also submit their feedback online. Now, more importantly, we are doing this not just for ourselves, we are doing this for future generations. I think my contact with Long Island started when I was a JC student, like some 30 years ago, right? So you can imagine how long and complex the Long Island project can be. I was very inspired when I was a JC student taking part in the Long Island planning competition at that point in time. Subsequently, when I graduated, I decided to join URA to do urban planning. And now I feel very privileged to have the opportunities to continue this project that I started off as a student. So I would say to all the young people out there, come step forward and join us in this process, because it's not going to be a one-off event. It's something that will take place over the next few decades. They will definitely have a chance to be able to play a part in shaping a very important future for Singapore.
Yep, so thank you so much, Wai Kin and Jung Chi, for your time at East Coast Park today.
Thanks for having
Thank you
us
very
here.
much.
The East Coast area was the result of a major land reclamation project between the 1960s and 1980s. In the reclamation process, Singapore's longest stretch of sandy shore was lost and the intertidal area buried, causing great loss of marine life there. But after a couple decades, sea life returned. Corals have recolonized the reclaimed shoreline and seawalls at East Coast Park. The critically endangered hawksbill turtles and the coastal horseshoe crabs have nesting spots along the beach. We find out more from Lester Tan, who chairs the Marine Conservation Group of Nature Society Singapore. Hi Lester, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. Hello.
At East Coast Park, the only living things I notice are humans and their pets. But here we are in Marina East, at a lesser-known habitat which serves as a nesting ground for shorebirds such as the Malaysian plovers. This is one of many pockets of biodiversity along the East Coast. Lester, could you walk us through some of the living shorelines of this stretch?
There are various marine species that are hidden underwater, be it either the intertidal zone or the subtidal zone, and thus they are not often revealed. However, you can actually spot them during the low tides. There are seagrass meadows, coral reefs, and there are diverse associated marine fauna and flora. Sea turtles and horseshoe crabs, or rather coastal horseshoe crabs, also use the same shoreline for their nestlings. There are also avian life, especially here in Marina East Straits, that compromises both residents and migratory. And we have residents such as grey herons, purple herons, lesser whistling ducks. And this particular rock revetment attracts migratory species such as the Kentish plovers and white-faced plovers, all sharing this very peculiar habitat just right in front of us, a flooded plains that is facing the water.
Would you be able to explain the Malaysian plovers that use this site specifically for nesting?
So the Malaysian plovers have a very unique habitat, compromises of both the intertidal zone, the sandy beach, and also the rock revetment. And behind the rock revetment is always a grassland. Another similar habitat can be found at Changi Bay, which also has a small intertidal zone, a sandy beach, rock revetments, and of course the grass patch behind. And surprisingly, the Malaysian plovers will then lay its eggs on the rock revetment and uses the marine debris as a hide and seek from the predators event. So the chick will hatch and then they will use the marine debris to hide themselves or camouflage themselves from the predators at times where we clean out all the marine debris.
Very interesting. So it's a very crucial habitat for these Malaysian plovers. And are they considered threatened in Singapore? What's their status?
They are close to critically endangered, yeah. You don't really see a lot of them anymore in these days. Very specific spots you will have to go to.
Which is Marina
one
East,
of it is
one
here,
them.
yes.
Yeah. So I understand that the East Coast area is also a nesting site for coastal horseshoe crabs as well as the endangered hawksbill turtles.
Yeah,
Where are they
so
found?
in fact you can actually find the hawksbill turtle and the coastal horseshoe crab from where we are right now. I've recently spotted one definitely at the corner, and all the way down to Tanah Merah area. And I think most Singaporeans, or rather it's been published out there, that the hawksbill turtle can be found along the National Sailing Club Centre, right, where the hawksbill turtle will come up to shore, lay its eggs, and there are also regular monitoring by NParks volunteers that will head down there to actually look for the hawksbill eggs, right. For the coastal horseshoe crabs, they will also use the same area, and I've known people in East Coast Park who would love to build sandcastles and their kids will somehow incidentally dig up a horseshoe crab eggs.
And another habitat I wanted to discuss would be closer to Tanah Merah, where there is a rich area of hard corals as well as seagrasses. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so the hard corals came in and they recolonized the entire Tanah Merah jetty area. There are patches of seagrass meadows as well. So seagrass meadows are really rich habitats for various marine faunas.
So I'm guessing these turtle nesting sites, seagrasses and coral patches are likely to go with the reclamation for Long Island.
Yes, unfortunately, they will all be decimated or gone with the reclamation. However, there can be measures to relocate some of this fauna and flora, notably the rarer or endangered species, which then can help to preserve some of the genetic diversity that comes along with it, right? Yeah.
Is there an example of how the existing marine life along East Coast Park can actually be safely relocated?
So if we can carefully plan with phases of construction after we have both completed the environmental and engineering technical studies, we then may allow some of this relocation time and area to strive again. And we have to also look at a more holistic view. So this comes along with the whole Changi area of reclamation that's also happening, which is not very far away from the East Coast reclamation that's going to come up. And we have to also look at the other reclamation along the Greater Southern Front as well, which is just on the other side from here. So with this holistic approach, we can then carefully plan the timeline of this entire building construction phase.
And less than 10 km away from the East Coast is the marine life-rich Southern Islands, and there are plans to have a second marine park there as well. Lester, how would marine biodiversity in the Southern Islands be affected by the heavy reclamation work we will expect for Long Island?
So siltation and change in hydrology from the construction may impact even other habitats, other nearby habitats, not just the marine park that's located in the Southern Islands. And measures such as silt screens should be meticulously put in place, right? It shouldn't just be haphazardly just placed, and we hope that the silt screen work. I think it needs to be properly calculated and properly placed as much as possible to minimize the impact. And we talk about minimizing the impact. Unfortunately, there will be some impact nonetheless. So your siltation, your plumes will also go down to the South Islands. And that's why we are very concerned about the pollution that can happen from the construction as well.
Do you think there is a chance for life to return in the future after the reclamation when Long Island is built, just like it did for the previous East Coast reclamation?
So East Coast coastline was reclaimed somewhere between 40 to 60 years ago, and ecology was definitely not part of its design plan. However, when we look at the shorelines today, it is actually teeming with a lot of life, right?
Yeah.
And if we take this opportunity to better design Long Island's shoreline, to plan, to encourage, to even speed up the recruitment and recolonization of marine flora and fauna, I think we can create a better diverse or even resilient natural space for future generations to come. And indeed, it will be a challenge, right? And the challenge can be made more difficult by the climate change, sea level rise, the warmings of water. But nonetheless, I think it's a challenge that all of us have to take on together.
So in terms of, I guess, including nature in the design of Long Island to ensure that the marine life and the shorebirds would continue thriving after Long Island is built, what are some things you envision?
So I envision a mirage of different coastal habitats along the Long Island, both seaward facing and both freshwater facing. Different coastal habitats such as wetlands, mangrove, seagrass meadows, coral reefs, even rocky shores if possible. And definitely we need the sandy beach. We are indeed an island, right? So it doesn't make sense with this hot behind walls and fences, and we don't get the island life of being connected to the waters. So with all these different habitats, I think it will bring back life, not just the marine life, even birds, even mammals, or maybe even the monkeys. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting, and a very good form of envisioning that we hope we can get there as well.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So on this note, Lester, do you have anything else to add about the marine aspect of Long Island's project?
Also hoping to retain as much of the existing nature space. So especially at Marina East Drive right now, you can see there is some sort of a small man-made or mangrove forest, and there's a coastal forest. And with this very nice habitat over here, if we are able to replicate this on the Long Island itself, that might give hope for this Malaysian plovers and whatever wildlife is living here to actually migrate or move on to somewhere. And we'll still be able to enjoy this after Long Island is being built.
Now we are back at the heart of East Coast Park to hear from youths. The young people, after all, will live to see Long Island. Maximus Tan, who is 22, grew up in Siglap, born and bred in the East Coast. He regularly goes to the east to run and unwind. He just went for a jog before joining us. Hello, Maximus.
Hi, nice to meet you, Amanda.
Crispus Tan, who is 27, lives in the West, but he has been involved with PUB's Our Coastal Conversation Dialogues. Hello, Crispus.
Hi, nice to meet you.
So, Maximus, let me get started with you. What are some of your fondest memories of the East Coast?
Some of my fondest memories of the East Coast include, since I was young, like I was a young child, I would play in the sand and then make sandcastles with whatever I could find, buckets, things like that. And then when I grew older, I started cycling and jogging around, and I even had cycling trips with friends. Even sometimes the whole East Coast stretch is pretty long, and so I think it's a really scenic place to ride, and it's somewhere that I wouldn't forget.
Yeah, so it is a place of nostalgia because you grew up here, as well as a lot of recreation and relaxation. So for the both of you, what were your reactions when you heard about Long Island? Maybe you can start with Crispus first.
Right. To be very honest, I wasn't too surprised because I've taken a look at the long-term plans of our nation, and I know that this is something that is in the pipeline and will eventually come to realization. So I guess this is the time that we have embarked on that.
Right. And for you, Maximus, what were your reactions?
When I first heard about the Long Island, I was really curious to figure out and find out actually what changes would there be to East Coast Park. Would it still be accessible as it is today? Would people still be able to jog around? And on top of that, on the Long Island itself, like what would this land be used for? And also, how can it benefit our future generations and the population in the area? So, personally, I do hope to see a lot of recreational facilities and more amenities, in fact, on the Long Island. I'm looking forward to using them.
Okay, thank you. And how do you both feel about having to possibly live through the worsening impacts of climate change and rising sea levels? So what are your thoughts about that? Do you feel anxious? Maybe we can start with Crispus.
Right. So definitely I speak for most people, or quite a significant portion of my generation, when I say that many of us are quite concerned about whether Singapore, as we know today, will still be livable in, say, a few decades down the road, where we know that many of our days will be seeing temperatures very high, perhaps close to 40 degrees Celsius. And we also know that by 2100, the sea level will be at least estimated to be 1 meters above the current sea level. So that has caused some anxiety for some of my friends, and while we feel sometimes helpless, we also hope that our generation can come up with something that can perhaps work around these challenges.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, Maximus, on this?
Right, I do believe that sea level rise is something that we can't control, right? It's almost inevitable, in fact. And what Singapore does with this threat of rising sea level, we do not have many options, in fact. Obviously, one of them would be, to build a seawall, and then, or plant mangroves or things like that. With seawalls that could, damage the shoreline, and then we wouldn't have the beach that we see today. It would be like concretized with a very industrial look. So, I think with Long Island, Long Island presents itself as a very unique opportunity. Not only can we protect against the rising sea level, but at the same time, we can create land which is it will be a vast area which can be used to service Singapore's future needs given our current land constraints.
Okay, thank you for that both. So the East Coast landscape we grew up with is probably going to change over the decades with the building of Long Island. How do you feel about that? Crispus?
I do feel quite a little sad that I think that's one of my first reactions as well when I know that Long Island would be something that comes up. So Long Island is also somewhere where we are worried would block our sea views as well, and also the recreational character of the East, which I really enjoy. I hope that that's something that can be retained so that even our future generations can come here for all these things we are enjoying here, like cycling, sailing, and all the water sports that are offered here today.
So in our lifetime, we will probably see Long Island shaping up. Maximus, what are your hopes for it?
I hope for Long Island to be a new beacon of the East, something that will attract people to the area, even something that wouldn't cause the East to lose its rustic charm and its heritage, but in fact be complementary. Something similar to how inland along the bay or the reservoir, which they were going to build, you're going to have the heritage and whatever that's maintained, but yet on the other hand, on the Long Island itself, something that will enliven and really bring energy into the area.
That's interesting. Crispus, you've been part of PUB's Coastal Conversation Dialogues, and you've also participated in a competition related to Long Island. Based on those ideas, what are your hopes and expectations for Long Island in the future?
I think that Long Island holds many possibilities for us, and being situated in the east, Long Island is also rather distinct from our coastlines in the other parts of Singapore, for example in the west or in Labrador Park, for example. So the way we craft Long Island should create a very distinct and unique sense and identity. And of course, it should also think about the future in terms of preserving biodiversity. So in the west, there are more nature reserves, and also in the central of Singapore, we know that. But in the east, perhaps we could look at how biodiversity can be incorporated into this design of the Long Island. There should be a mix of nature-based solutions with engineering solutions. This was something that many participants in the coastal conversations actually mentioned. We were hoping to see more, perhaps, spaces where corals can grow and we can perhaps snorkel to appreciate them, and also some spaces that can also remind us of how the sea level is indeed rising. So we should be able to observe this change over time, unlike how we would not be able to do so on a coastal revetment, which is concretized, or even a seawall where we are kind of disconnected from the coast. Perhaps it's a undulating hilly terrain, and water just rises over time.
Oh yeah, that sounds very interesting, and it's good for education as well. Okay, and now we've talked about like hopes and expectations. Are there any concerns you may have as young people about this mega project? Maximus?
Definitely one of the concerns would be, in my opinion, is personally, I feel that whether Long Island would allow the beach to remain today as what it is. Like, would we still be able to have sandy shores, and then, or would it be something that will become more like a reservoir? So there's a bit of uncertainty in that area. And if that is the case, whether would it be able to perhaps overcome these technical limitations, perhaps by reserving a specific area for perhaps beach use, where we can build an artificial beach or something like that. I feel in this, we need to try and find the best outcome of whatever technical constraints that we have. Just because the Long Island may cause a reservoir to be built or something like that, it's not the end of the world. In fact, it presents opportunity to create more out of the space.
Yeah, so it's about using creativity to get away from the technical constraints and also try to preserve as much of the beach that we have right now on East Coast Park. Okay, as for yourself, Crispus, what are some concerns you may have about Long Island?
Yes, I feel that with the Long Island, there are some things that are threatened. And as Maximus has already mentioned, the connection that we have to the sea, which is already quite limited, even though we are an island, because of many other purposes that our waterfronts serve, that connection with the sea might be lost as a result of the reclamation of Long Island. And with that, actually, we may also risk losing some of our spaces to perhaps have some sea sports. For example, the sailing community, who was also present at the coastal conversations, they are quite concerned that they wouldn't be able to practice in the sea given the change in the waves and all these that will result from the reclamation. And of course, we are also concerned with how the Long Island's waterfront will be like. I think many people still want to be able to access the water freely than to view it from a distance or to see it beneath, like over the railings. Yeah, so I think there is this longing for more places to relax, but at the same time, keeping our shores today safe.
Yes, that's a very interesting insight as well. Okay, so now we've talked about the concerns, but I have a bit of a fun question for y'all, more of a forward-thinking one, I guess. So, there is a possibility for housing on Long Island, and then with sea level rise, for you, Maximus, do you see yourself living in the East Coast for many more decades to come?
Well, certainly I've grown up in the East Coast, and of course I would love to stay in the East Coast, for the rest of my life if possible. And I think Long Island, well, yes, we might see housing there someday, perhaps, but then again, given housing on the Long Island itself, I do understand that many residents have concerns over the sea view and then the view that you impede. But if you were to take one step back, in fact, and look at the issue of the Long Island, the construction of the Long Island actually is many decades ahead of us. It'll be quite some time before we'll be able to actually do anything with the land that we just reclaimed. Even as it's reclaimed, it takes some time for the land to settle. And I believe when that will be the time for our future generations to decide what we ought to do with the land.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, there is the future generation to think about, because they would probably be making the decision on what exactly to do with the land. So Crispus, another forward-thinking question. If you had a chance to live on Long Island, would you do so? Or would you prefer to live on mainland, which might be safer?
I find it quite interesting to imagine how life on Long Island would be like, because in the way we are developing the city today, it seems that we are going to have more mixed-use areas. Perhaps Long Island could be one of these areas that we see, not just housing, but perhaps some employment areas or recreational zones will be set up so that it doesn't restrict itself to only a certain type of land use. And ideally, it should also not be too jarring with the rest of the East, which has a more residential and recreational character. So this sense of a more relaxed and coastal area would be probably nice to live in.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for coming today to talk about Long Island as representing the voice of the youths who will live to see Long Island. So thank you, Maximus.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Crispus.
Thank you as well.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening.